They said they didn't need Europe, but now even Brexit voters are begging to come back. Years after walking away from the EU, Britain's bravado is fading fast. Economic strain, global instability, and public pressure have sparked one awkward question. Would Europe even want the UK back? In this video, we'll explore Europe's raw and unfiltered opinions on Britain's potential return and uncover whether the EU would welcome the UK back or leave it out in the cold. They called it taking back control. In 2016, millions of Brits cast their votes to leave the European Union, driven by promises of sovereignty, tighter immigration, and national pride. But nearly a decade later, the mood is shifting fast. The very people who once shouted, "Leave means leave," are now quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, wondering, did we make a mistake? It's no longer just the pro-Remain crowd talking about the consequences. A growing number of Leave voters are starting to admit that what they were promised isn't exactly what they got. Recent polling data shows that 55% of Britons would now support rejoining the EU, or at least accessing the single market, even if it means accepting freedom of movement again. That's right, the same free movement that was painted as a threat is now being reconsidered as a lifeline. So what's changed? The everyday grind, mostly. Long gone are the lofty campaign slogans. What remains is the reality of slower growth, higher food prices, and endless red tape for businesses. Small import-export companies that once thrived on seamless trade across the continent are now suffocating under customs declarations and new tariffs. British tourists used to hop across the channel with little more than a passport. Now they face long queues, roaming charges, and a whole lot of hassle. And it's not just about money. Retired Brits living in Spain are suddenly facing residency issues. Students can't participate in EU exchange programs like they used to. Even musicians have felt the blow, with complicated visas and restricted travel making European tours a logistical nightmare. All of this has created a strange political twist. Some of the most passionate Brexit backers are now among the most frustrated citizens. It's not uncommon to hear former Leave voters say that they thought it'd be better by now, or that they didn't sign up for this. In focus groups and radio call-ins, there's a creeping sense of regret which has been growing louder every year. Of course, not everyone is ready to admit regret outright, but the desire for something better and easier is undeniable. And that's where Europe enters the picture again. The idea of a deal, a compromise, a smoother path forward is slowly taking shape in public conversations. People don't want to reverse history, they just want to fix what's broken. And here's the twist. This sentiment isn't just confined to the UK, because while British voters are re-evaluating their choices, it turns out the rest of Europe might just be looking back at Britain too with surprisingly open arms. Nearly a decade after the Brexit referendum, something surprising is bubbling beneath the surface across Europe. Sympathy. Not mockery, not smugness, but a genuine willingness from ordinary Europeans to see Britain return in some form. And it's not just emotional. Poll after poll shows that citizens in major EU countries like Poland, Spain, and Germany actually want stronger ties, even if politicians are still tiptoeing around the idea. A survey by the European Council on Foreign Relations revealed that majorities in Germany, Spain, Italy, and Poland would support a bespoke deal giving the UK partial access to the single market, particularly in exchange for closer security cooperation. In Spain, the support hit 45%. Italy wasn't far behind at 41%, and even in traditionally skeptical France, 36% backed the idea, outnumbering the 18% who opposed it. These aren't vague calls for reconciliation, they're actual endorsements for closer collaboration. The reasoning behind this shift? A mix of shared challenges and fading hostilities. The EU, like the UK, has had to adapt to a more hostile world. War in Ukraine, economic disruption, growing authoritarianism, and the uncertain shadow of Donald Trump's presidency. Within that chaos, the need for trusted partners has become obvious. The UK may be out of the club, but it's still in the neighbourhood, and increasingly Europeans want it back at the table. Support for re-engagement isn't just about grand strategy, it's also about trade, travel, and everyday life. Europeans, particularly the younger generation, have lost something since Brexit too. Cross-border business, research collaboration and student exchanges have all suffered. The severed links weren't one-sided. That absence is now fueling a call to rebuild, not rewind. On the British side, this sentiment is echoing a growing public support for tighter bonds with Europe. A poll found that 66% of Britons favoured a closer relationship with the EU, including 52% of those who originally voted leave. It also revealed that many UK respondents would accept the return of free movement in exchange for single market access. That's a dramatic reversal from the rhetoric that once defined the Brexit campaign. This rising mutual interest suggests the potential for a reset, but only if the right people are willing to push it forward. And that's where the friction begins, because while public attitudes might be softening on both sides of the channel, there's one major roadblock standing in the way of real progress: the politicians. Despite growing public demand for closer UK-EU ties, political leaders on both sides remain hesitant. In London, then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has repeatedly ruled out rejoining the single market or customs union. He insists that Britain must chart its own path, and any softness on Brexit risks angering hardline Eurosceptics and right-wing media outlets. Meanwhile, Labour leader Keir Starmer offers a similar refrain. He vows to make Brexit work rather than reverse it. Even if Labour wins the next election, Starmer has confirmed that reopening talks on free movement or single market membership is off the agenda. His priority is stability, not reintegration. In practice, that means pushing aside options that could smooth trade or travel, despite polls showing widespread public support for exactly those measures. Turning to Brussels, the picture is no brighter. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has focused on internal EU reforms and enlargement, not on wooing London. On the national stage, France and Germany provide key examples of caution. President Emmanuel Macron has publicly stated that any special UK status must respect the integrity of the single market. He fears that too many concessions would undermine his own negotiating position with challengers in Paris who flirt with Euroscepticism. In Germany, Chancellor Olaf Scholz emphasizes security cooperation and youth exchanges, but stops short of backing free movement. His coalition partners remain divided, making bold moves politically risky. This reluctance stems in part from trust issues. Brexit negotiations in 2019 and 2020 were particularly bitter. EU officials recall broken promises and sudden walkouts. Granting the UK deep access now could reward what many perceive as bad faith. At the same time, British ministers remember being lectured on EU rules and accused of wanting cherry-picked benefits without full membership responsibilities. Talks on a UK-EU youth mobility scheme have been underway since late 2024, but proposals remain in draft form. Here's one statistic that turned heads. After Brexit, the new immigration system made it 6.5 times easier for young Europeans to move to Britain than for young Britons to move to the EU. That's right. Under current rules, EU citizens can access UK work visas far more freely than Brits of the same age that can work, study, or live across the Channel. It's a lopsided setup that leaves British youth with far fewer opportunities abroad, while their European peers enjoy a comparatively open door. All the while, voters grow more impatient. Opinion pieces in major European newspapers call for pragmatic solutions. Think tanks publish roadmaps for differentiated partnerships. Business leaders warn of lost opportunities if leaders cling to old battles. Citizens on both sides voice one simple question: why can't our elected officials catch up with public opinion? But in politics, fear often trumps demand. Leaders worry about losing the next election or sparking nationalist backlash. They calculate short-term pain over long-term gain, and so the gap widens between what people want and what politicians will allow. And when the policies fall short and negotiations stall, pressure builds. The question now is not whether governments will reconsider their positions, but how urgently they must act when the next chapter arrives, where global events will force their hand in ways no amount of political caution can delay. Global events have a way of cutting through political hesitation, and in recent years they've done just that. While the UK and the EU bicker over red lines and political optics, the world outside is rapidly shifting, and suddenly the costs of going it alone have become harder to ignore. The most immediate wake-up call came from the east. Russia's invasion of Ukraine sparked a geopolitical earthquake. It didn't just shatter peace in Europe, it reignited a sense of collective vulnerability across the continent. Almost overnight, defense cooperation, energy security, and diplomatic unity became top priorities, and for both the UK and the EU, these priorities pointed in the same direction, towards each other. In response to the war, the UK and the EU have coordinated closely on sanctions, military aid, and refugee support. London played a key role in arming Ukraine and implementing strict economic sanctions against Moscow, working hand in hand with Brussels despite their former separation. These shared efforts have reminded both sides of what unity can accomplish and what fragmentation puts at risk. But that's not the only factor reshaping the landscape. European public opinion has notably shifted after Trump. According to a poll by the European Council on Foreign Relations, an average of 50% of respondents across 11 EU member states now view the United States as a necessary partner rather than a close ally. This shift in perception has started discussions with Europe about the importance of strengthening internal cooperation, including with former partners like the UK. From defense strategies to cybersecurity coordination, many now see the UK as an indispensable, if estranged, partner. The Atlantic bond is only as strong as its weakest link, and many worry that political fractures between London and Brussels could leave that link dangerously exposed. Global challenges are increasingly cross-border by nature. Energy markets, supply chains, and migration patterns don't respect political lines drawn on a map. And when disaster strikes, going solo can leave countries vulnerable. The pandemic was a harsh lesson in this, highlighting how fragmented responses lead to shortages, miscommunication, and public distrust. These global pressures are nudging even reluctant politicians towards cooperation. Recent reports suggested quiet progress on frameworks for energy sharing, cyber defense, and trade simplification. While not headline-grabbing, these efforts signal a slow shift, a realization that ideological purity won't protect citizens from real-world crisis. And yet, even as global events nudge both sides together, one crucial question remains. If Britain and the EU aren't heading towards a full reunion, then what exactly are they heading toward? As the political landscape shifts and global pressure mounts, both the UK and EU are quietly laying the groundwork for something in between. Not membership, not separation, but a middle path, a new model of partnership that respects Brexit while addressing its many shortcomings. And this idea isn't just theoretical anymore. Several specific proposals are already gaining momentum, many of them driven not by politicians, but by businesses, academics, and ordinary citizens who want function over fanfare. One of the most talked about concepts is youth mobility. With the UK no longer part of the Erasmus programme, students and young workers have lost a vital avenue for cultural exchange and education. But now, there's a movement on both sides to build a new framework. In late 2024, EU leaders indicated interest in a UK-EU youth mobility scheme, potentially offering mutual access to student exchanges, internships, and short-term work permits. It's not quite freedom of movement, but it's a step toward repairing the generational damage caused by Brexit. And another idea gathering support is selective single-market access. Instead of full re-entry, some British think tanks and European trade officials have floated the concept of sector-specific deals, agreements that would allow British goods and services to move more freely in exchange for UK compliance with certain EU regulations. This kind of targeted integration could streamline trade for key industries like pharmaceuticals, automotive manufacturing, and financial services, all without reigniting full membership debates. Security is also a major area of convergence. The war in Ukraine has shown how fragmented intelligence sharing leaves critical gaps. Both British and European officials have quietly restarted talks on enhanced cooperation in areas like cybersecurity, counter-terrorism, and organized crime. The idea is simple. Threats are borderless, so the response must be too. Even migration, a core battleground of the Brexit debate, is entering a new phase. In 2024, reports emerged that the UK and EU were exploring frameworks to manage cross-border asylum claims and deportations. These aren't dramatic policy reversals, but they are meaningful signs of governments finding pragmatic workarounds in the face of pressure from both their citizens and their neighbours. Of course, none of these developments amount to a full-scale reversal of Brexit, but together they signal a growing appetite for partnership on new terms that might suit today's geopolitical climate better than the binary choices of the past. A looser, more flexible relationship could give both sides what they need: cooperation without compromise, structure without surrender. And here's the real twist. This in-between space might actually become the new European model, with other countries like Norway, Switzerland, and even Ukraine negotiating hybrid relationships with Brussels. Britain's next chapter could be less about going backward and more about redefining what Europe even means. Because, for all the talk of separation, the biggest takeaway since Brexit is clear. Isolation is expensive, and unity, however imperfect, may be the only option left that actually works. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.